Hey everybody, this is Mr. Miller back here. I am kind of in the dark right now, but this is the only way that I could get it so that you can see my screen, which you can't really see, but now it comes in nice and clear. And so I'm like basically in the dark, which is okay. It'll be fine. You just kind of need to hear my voice. So we are going to pick up where we had left off on, I guess it would be Monday or Tuesday, uh, whatever class you had. Whatever day you had class, we started talking about the political spectrum. Remember, a spectrum is kind of from one end to the other. There's a lot of stuff in the middle, but we've got this kind of line from one end to the other. And if you recall, we had started to kind of discuss where certain ideas belong on this political spectrum. We had said that the liberal people belong on the left, and the conservative people belong on the right. So we've got, I will write those in there. I'm going to use blue for liberal. So liberal, you can kind of see that. And then I'm going to use red for conservative. So liberals and conservatives on both sides here. And then we said in the middle, we've got this other group that we would call moderates, or sometimes we call them the middle of the road. So I'm going to write them in. Middle of the road, and we would put them in quotation marks because they belong in quotation marks, because that's just a saying that we would use for them. So we also said that the political spectrum, it's represented by a bell curve, which we had talked about just briefly in class, about how you use it in math. You use it for statistics, and a majority of whatever you're looking at, whatever statistic you're looking at, falls somewhere on this bell curve. And it's meant to show that a majority of things or a majority of people will fall in the middle somewhere. It's a random sampling, and it would follow this trend. One of my favorite examples is height. If you take the height of everybody in the room, odds are in the middle somewhere, there's going to be a lot of people who are between like 5'5" and 5'7", 5'8". It depends on guys versus girls, obviously, but that's kind of the middle, 5'5" to 5'9" maybe. And then there's a couple people who are really tall, a couple people who are shorter than that. So you've got those boundaries on the end. But a majority of people are going to fall kind of in the middle. They are not either really tall or they are not really short. So it kind of samples out that way and evens out. So now that we've got our bell curve, we've kind of overviewed what we've already talked about. Okay, we now have to kind of, and I don't know if we're actually going to mention this in class, so if it is a repeat, then that's fine, but I'm actually making this video before class happens, so I'm assuming how far we're going to get. So we have on each side, we have certain groups of people that would be, a little out there. We would say, oh, they're out there. They're crazy. They're way out there. Okay, and that's what we mean. They're like far away from normal people. They are either really liberal or really conservative. So what do we call those people? Well, we've got names for them. On the liberal side, we have people that are what they call revolutionaries. So I'm going to write that in here. I'm just going to say revolutionary. The idea with that is that liberal people, okay, the thing that explains liberal people best is they want to change and improve society little by little as they go. Okay, improve society little by little, one step at a time. Okay, so make changes to society, improve society. Revolutionaries, they want to change society, but they want to do so drastically and very, very quickly. So revolutionaries are people who want to overthrow the government and want to do things like that would get massive changes very, very quickly. Okay, so those would be revolutionaries. Now, we have a couple good examples of revolutionaries that have happened over the course of history. Okay, so we've got, for example, Joseph Stalin. Most of the time, revolutionaries, we would call them either communists or socialists. We would call those kind of two groups. So I'll write those in there. So I've got communist, socialist, and I'm going to put like Joseph Stalin. I'm going to put Mao Zedong from China. Both of these guys responsible for killing something like 50 million people, if you use their estimates. So, just drastic change that these guys are trying to do. Now, I would say that the reason why they are the far left, they are way out there on the end, okay? Part of the reason of that is that very, very few people actually agree with them. You'd be very hard-pressed to find people in the world today that don't reside in China that would say that Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong, they were great people and they did awesome things. Very few people would say that. Almost nobody. In America, I don't think, maybe a few people, but those people would be way out there, way on the end. They do not agree with the majority of the things that happen in America. So that is an example of saying, they're far out there, they're far left. And as a result, the number of people that are down here is very, very low. Okay, very few people live out on this end, way out there, super liberal people. Now, let's talk about super conservative people, because there are some of them, and there are, they're out there. And just as we had revolutionary people, we have conservatives, which are, as we would say, reactionary. So reactionary people, just as I said, liberal people want to change society little by little until it gets better. Conservatives want to kind of preserve society and keep it the way that it has been for a very long time. Okay, things have been good for a long time, and let's keep it that way, is what conservatives would say. Now, reactionaries, they are an extreme conservative. What that means is that they think that society is pretty good right now, but it would be even better if we went back to a previous time that was even better than now, okay, before all these liberal people messed it up. Let's go back to a better time, a better time that we had in our history, or that somebody had in their history, and let's get back to that. So they are reacting to the changes in society and deciding that they want to turn back. Okay, so some examples of this. Okay, we said that communists and socialists, they belong over here on the far left. On the far right, we have another ist, and they would be called fascists. Okay. So fascist people belong over here. Now, fascist people, you probably are thinking of one guy in particular, and you should be thinking of him. His name would be Adolf Hitler. Okay, so Hitler, we would say that neo-Nazis or just Nazis, they were all reactionary groups, meaning that they wanted to go back to a better time. They did not, and I mean, Hitler, he was specifically looking at Jewish people, and he was saying, before the Jews got to Germany, in his opinion, things were better. And so he wanted to get rid of that. So there you go, the Holocaust and all that came with that. So Hitler and the Nazis, they are fascists. And also, I guess we could include a current group in America, the KKK, would belong over here. So these groups, they are very, very, very like ultra conservative, hyper conservative, and they are conservative to the point where hardly anybody agrees with them. Okay, you would be hard pressed to find people who would openly admit they belong to the KKK. You'd be hard pressed to find people who would be neo-Nazis nowadays. That's because hardly anybody lives down here. There's nobody who believes that. Okay, nobody actually believes that. So I'm running out of room on my computer. I'll probably have to stop it and stitch it together. That's annoying. Okay, I'm back. I had to change computers. So here I am. Let's hope this works here. Oh, it does. Okay. So as I was saying, where I left off, revolutionaries, reactionaries, it is very hard to find those sorts of people nowadays, especially in America. Like we said, population, the height of the bell curve refers to population. So a majority of people live here in the middle somewhere. Very few people live down here. Very few people live down here. For most people, it's an insult to call, like if you have a conservative person, it's an insult to call them a fascist or, a reactionary. It's an insult to call a liberal person a socialist or a communist. Most people do not identify with those terms and do not want to be identified with those terms. Coincidentally, because both of them are they have horrible people affiliated with them. Okay, Adolf Hitler on one side and Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, and others on both sides that we didn't mention. Okay, so they have horrible people affiliated with them, so that is why they do not like to be associated with them, because they are not. So do not be kind of confused about that. I would also say that I find it interesting that if I was to ask which people are, or what are some of the worst people in the world, you probably would have come up with Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, maybe in your top 5 out of, if I gave you 5 guesses, okay, and if you remembered all that stuff from global history. I find it interesting that regardless of their way that they come from one side or the other, they both sides end up kind of going to the same thing, which is a totalitarian dictatorship, killing thousands, millions, hundreds of millions of people, maybe tens of millions. Okay, so that's kind of what both sides get to at some point if they're that extreme. So that's not good, obviously. But I find it interesting that they both get there in the long run. Now, one thing to mention about this, okay, we got just a couple more things that we got to add to this thing, and then we'll be wrapped up. We have a situation where occasionally this line tends to shift one way or the other. Okay, this bell curve based on the population. Where does the population in America live in terms of their politics? Sometimes a majority of Americans are more conservative. Okay, we have more conservative decades. Sometimes we have more liberal decades where the population kind of pulls this way a little bit. Okay, so we have kind of a curve that might look something like, for the conservatives, might look something like this, where a majority of them are kind of shifted a little bit and they are more conservative versus a decade that might look like this for liberal people. It's something like that. It's not a great representation, but it shifts a little bit. You see what I mean? So these are not big shifts, kind of swings back and forth, Some of these times when this might have happened, okay, I'll give you some decades, and then you might be able to tell why I'll explain why. But one decade when it was a more liberal country was probably the 1900s. It was the progressive era, 1900 to 1910. So I'm going to say 1900s. Because it was the progressive era. It was a time when things were changing. They were reforming society. They were improving society. Okay, that's what liberals are all about, is improving society little by little. Another decade would be the decade during the Great Depression, during the 1930s. When you have a situation where you've got FDR coming in, you've got the New Deal, you've got these sorts of programs, government size is drastically expanding. Okay, so all that stuff is more liberal. They're trying to improve society little by little. And then the last one that I would say, at least that we kind of have a full picture of, because more recent history is hard to get a grasp on, frankly. So the last one that I would say would be the 1960s. So the 1960s would be a time period when we had the Civil Rights era, we had John F. Kennedy, we had Lyndon B. Johnson, we had the Civil Rights era, we had voting rights, we had Title IX was not in that era, but we had the feminist movement starting up. There's just a lot of liberal activity going on in the 1960s. Now, in the Republican side of things, in the conservative decades, we've got a couple decades here that we need to mention, that we can mention. The first one would be probably the 1920s in the 1900s. We're only sticking to 1900 to 1980 or 90. Okay, so nothing beyond that and nothing earlier than that, because these things kind of shift around over time. So I would say the 1920s. So the 1920s, you had Republican presidents, you had an emphasis on business and a focus on business. Calvin Coolidge, president in the 1920s, actually said the chief business of the American people is business, meaning that's what we're focused on. So there you go, the 1920s. I would also say the 1950s were a conservative decade. The 1950s were that time period right after World War II, the beginning of the Cold War, Korea, the war in Korea, all that stuff contributed to feelings of prosperity at home, large increase in business activity at home, family values were emphasized. You've got the wife and the two kids and the husband goes off to work and the kids stay home and play in their yard that's surrounded by the white picket fence. Remember, I told you about that last year. So that's what we're dealing with here. Okay, the last one that I would say here would be what we would call probably a conservative resurgence in the 1980s. That is sparked by Ronald Reagan. Remember Ronald Reagan, president in the 1980s, 1981 to 1989. So Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush were involved in that decade. So we've got a lot of times when things shift back and forth, and it's kind of a pendulum. Okay, that's kind of just what it is. So ultimately, we've got a lot of stuff here that we've kind of gone through. I want to talk about a couple more things. Okay, so I'm going to end up erasing what I kind of just wrote with those decades. Let me see if I can erase all of this. I guess I might just do an eraser. That might be easier. Because I got an idea of what I want to do. Usually it's fun to try to place some people on this political spectrum, place some politicians that we might know of. So let me finish erasing this and then I will show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so I've got just the plain bell curve now, and I'm going to go with just a green pen here. So some current politicians that we can throw on here, because most politicians are either pretty liberal or pretty conservative. Very few modern day politicians belong in the middle here, where a majority of people agree with them. Okay, and part of that is just because we have two parties in America. Okay, we have Republicans and Democrats. Republicans on the conservative side, Democrats on the liberal side. And so each party has different ideas, very different ideas about how to run this country. So Republican ideas are going to belong a little bit more over here, and Democrat ideas are going to belong a little bit more over here. And as a result, the people that they nominate for president and for whatever belong more down the line than somebody in the middle. Now you might say, why can't somebody who's in the middle get elected as president? Then a majority of people would vote for them. If somebody belongs right there, then a majority of people would vote for them. The problem with that is that because we have a two-party system and those parties nominate their own people, you can never really have a moderate person win, because let's use this as an example. Okay, let's say the Democrats nominate a pretty liberal person who belongs right here. I guess I need a pen, not just my eraser. Let's say they nominate a pretty liberal person who belongs right there, and a moderate person who belongs right there. Okay. Problem is, the people who are actual Democrats voting in this Democratic election are all of these people and on. Okay, like right here, give or take, because there's a large amount of people who are not one party or the other, or some other party. So most of the Democrats are going to agree with this person more, this guy or this woman a little bit more than that person. So this person's going to get nominated for president. And as a result, you get somebody over here, you get somebody over here, and they fight it out for the people in the middle. Okay, and that's just kind of what happens. So let's go ahead and place just a couple people on this board, and then we will be done. So let's go with our most recent president before Donald Trump. Let's go with Barack Obama. He is a Democrat. He was a pretty liberal guy in terms of his policies when he was president, and kind of keeps those policies now. So I think he was considered to be one of the more liberal presidents that we've had in our history by most historians. So I'm going to put him in this area. I've lost my pen again. I guess I'll use black. I'm going to put him like somewhere in this area, and I'm going to say Obama. So Barack Obama belongs down there. Now, somebody else that we could mention that belongs on this side of things, somebody like Joe Biden. Okay, Joe Biden, in case you don't know, is running for president right now against Donald Trump. Joe Biden is a Democrat, so he's a liberal, but he is probably, there's some debate on what Joe Biden actually believes, because Joe Biden happens to be kind of old and not really sure whether or not he's being influenced by other people. They kind of just don't know. By a lot of people don't really know this. So for Joe Biden, what I would probably say about him is that he's hard to put on here, but he's probably a little bit more moderate than Barack Obama was. So I'm going to put him somewhere in this category. I think that a lot of what he's saying that is pretty liberal is because he needs more liberal voters to help him win. So I don't think that he's really really all that liberal. I mean, he's a pretty liberal guy, but in terms of where he belongs on this, he's less liberal, I think, than Barack Obama was as president. Now, Republican side, let's talk about this. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Oh, Donald Trump, because he's a Republican. I'm not going to put him on here yet, and I'll tell you why in 3 minutes. Okay, and then we'll wrap up after Donald Trump. We can put in our most recent Republican president, George W. Bush. George W. Bush happened to be a pretty moderate Republican. He was criticized by a lot of conservatives as being not really that conservative at all. Not conservative at all. So I'm going to put him probably up here as Bush. So George W. Bush, the reason why I put him up here is because he actually spent more money than anybody else as president ever before him. He doubled our national debt, and more than doubled it. And usually a conservative thing is stop spending money, spend less money, save money. That's a conservative idea. But George W. Bush spent a lot of money. So George W. Bush, that's kind of what he's got. But he was still conservative in some ways, more social issues. But in terms of economics, he was really not that conservative. Who else can we put up here? You might remember somebody like Mitt Romney. Maybe you remember who he is. Mitt Romney ran for president 8 years ago at this point. So maybe you heard about him when you were in like 4th grade. But Mitt Romney ran for president on the Republican side, and he was a pretty conservative guy. So I'm going to put him somewhere over here. And you could even say like Ronald Reagan. He's relatively recent enough, and he'd be even more conservative, I think. So Ronald Reagan belongs down there. Now, what I would say, last thing I'm going to tell you is Donald Trump. Okay, where does he belong? Well, there's some interesting things about Donald Trump. In some ways, so for example, he didn't used to be a Republican. He used to be a Democrat. Donated a lot of his money to Democrat people, but he's a Republican now, so he has switched at some point. He also used to be very much in favor of abortion. Now he's not. He used to be critical of our nation's military and our nation's wars. Now he's not completely. Okay, so some interesting things about him. Okay, his opinions have changed over time, and part of the reason why his opinions change over time is because he is not able to really be put on this diagram, because he would be what is defined as a populist. Okay, a populist. So I'm going to say Trump So Trump is a populist. What I mean by a populist is somebody who looks at the popular views in America and takes them over. Okay, I don't really actually know what Donald Trump thinks about a lot of things. I know what he is giving off to people, and that is that he's a very conservative person. But even a lot of conservatives don't like him because he's not conservative in every way. Okay, so he's just an interesting guy, but he is really not able to be put on this diagram, because in some places he shows up over here, and sometimes in his life he shows up over here, somewhere in here. I don't know really where he would belong right now, but he is probably what we would call a populist, and it is hard for us to put him on there because we just really don't know which Donald Trump we're talking about. Are we talking about the one from 5 years ago, the one from today, or the one from 20 years ago? They're all different viewpoints each of the times. So it's just an interesting thing with him. Okay, so that's all I got for you. We will have a current event that is due on the day that you come back, which would be either Thursday or Friday, depending on what group you're in. So there is a current event that's due, a homework assignment that's due, and you need to have that ready and hopefully ready to share with the rest of class. And we will spend our class time discussing those. So that'll be the deal for next class in person. So we will see you then. Safe week or day or 2 days. Bye.